Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast episode. Today, we're going to talk about anxiety, depression, psychology. Really nice episode. Before we start, I would just like to let you know that I rebranded the podcast. Before it was the Road Delta podcast, kind of a placeholder name. Now it's called Road of Mentors. I think it's a little bit easier to know what the hell the podcast is about. And I wanted to make it easier and a more catchy name. Hopefully I achieved that. I'm sure you will let me know. It will be awesome to get your feedback. So before we start with the show, just like to thank you for consuming the content. And if you want to support the show, it will help if you leave a review on iTunes. If you're watching this on YouTube, just comment down below, subscribe to Road Delta, and let me know if you enjoy this type of content. Now, today's episode is very dear to me. I don't know if you're aware of this from my previous other contents that I suffered from social anxiety before, and I wanted to get more information about the general topic of anxiety, depression, and I reached out to a psychotherapist. His name is Nathaniel, Cilley, and we're gonna talk with him today. He's based in New York City, in Manhattan, and he specializes in a kind of therapy called REBT, so Rational Emotional Behavioral Therapy. That's right, BT, yeah. And before the show and I talked to him, I researched quite a bit about the topic, and I'm really into it, how it breaks down and treats patients. We're gonna cover all of that with him. So if you are into this kind of topic, if you suffered from anxiety, I think he'll give you a lot of closure about the mechanism, why we are anxious, and how to get rid of that feeling. It wasn't a very pleasant feeling when I was going through it. Fortunately, now I don't really feel it anymore. Of course, it's always a little bit present, but we're gonna talk with Nathaniel about that. I'm also an introvert, so that also plays a little bit into the equation. But yeah, so enjoy the show. Let me know if you like this new rebranding and enjoy the new intro. So if you are watching on YouTube, enjoy also the video portion of it. So enjoy the music, enjoy my voice. So enjoy the show. I will shut up and see you at the end of the conversation. The journey to live a more meaningful life can be quite overwhelming, but we don't have to travel alone. Welcome to Road of Mentors, a show where experts share their life's work and lessons that empower you to learn more about yourself and explore your true potential. My name is Diogo and I run the self-development blog Road Delta, and I hope you enjoy today's show. How I found out about you, it's just like I was just interested in anxiety and getting a little bit to know more about the subject, and I found your Instagram, and now we are here.
Right.
And so you are based in New York City, correct?
Yes, in Manhattan.
Okay, that must be a very anxiety-prone place, right?
It can be, for sure. I think there's a culture of anxiety just living in New York. So it seems like a lot of people just walk around feeling anxious all the time about anything, and it's kind of accepted as normal. And I'm originally from New Hampshire, which is a really small state and small town in New England.
Okay.
And I used to struggle with anxiety myself. So I ended up coming to New York City and kind of got lost in it for a while. It was so big and different and so many people, and it seemed like everybody was always stressed about something.
Yeah.
And so I ended up learning about this kind of therapy known as rational emotive behavior therapy, and I fell in love with it. It helped me with my own anxiety problems, And I kind of learned not only about myself, but about the culture here in New York of how many things we consider normal. And most people here have a lot of stress and anxiety that they don't really know that much about. So I decided to specialize working with people with anxiety. For one, I was somebody that struggled with it myself, and it's a pretty tough emotion to treat.
Yeah, I think I will I also shared this story in my content, but I don't know, I will also like to cover that with you, but
Sure.
it was more like social anxiety, and I don't know if there's like a different classifications or different ways to treat it, but it was also, like very, like my body just very tense and like running through like thoughts and just being in situations that I shouldn't be anxious, just being with friends and just being like laughing a lot, but just laughing because I didn't know how to react, and unfortunately I overcame that. Now it doesn't happen, but I think do you think it's like because there is accepted now in New York City, people don't really know that they are anxious, they just think it's normal, and that at the time I also was thinking that it was just normal and everyone was like that, but apparently not, right?
Right. So yes, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of people that think it's normal. Social anxiety is actually anxiety about shame or embarrassment. So, for instance, you're anxious about being in a social situation where maybe you say the wrong thing or you make a mistake, and people judge you for it, and then you feel shame and embarrassed.
Yeah.
Would you say that you're someone that's more introverted? Or,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, and people that are more introverted have a higher issue with social anxiety. So it's basically about performance. So if I were treating social anxiety, I would actually treat the client how to not be ashamed or embarrassed by making social mistakes, and then we can kind of knock them both out at the same time, because if you know how to not shame yourself, then what's there to be anxious about? So then you can kind of knock them both out.
Yeah. And that would be specific for social anxiety, or would that be just a place to start treating it?
So if they come in with social anxiety specifically and not just anxiety as a whole, I would just go right in and treat the shame and anxiety. The shame or embarrassment, we call it. So let me explain. Okay, so anxiety is always in the future. We are never anxious about the past, and we're never anxious about the present. We're always anxious about maybe something bad that happened in the past happening again in the future.
Yeah.
So it's a very tough emotion to treat because the future is forever uncertain and unknown. So it can be extremely unsettling for a lot of people, overthinking, second-guessing themselves, panic, worry, sometimes even behavioral changes like an OCD with ritualistic behavior are kind of behaviors that we've evolved to try to trick ourselves into thinking that we can control and have the future, and that we have guarantees, of which we never will, about the future. So it's very tough to treat. So if we are having social anxiety, it's about something on the horizon. It hasn't already happened yet. And whenever the present hits, and let's say I go into a room and everybody's looking at me, I'm going to feel anxiety in the moment, but I'm not thinking about what's happening now. I'm thinking about what's going to happen. Is someone going to reject me? Is someone going to think something negative about me? So it's always future-based. So I don't know if I should start with a little bit about what rational emotive behavior therapy is, and then how that can help treat social anxiety and shame.
Yeah, I think we can go there. I was looking at it a little bit before this conversation, and I'm really digging it. I really like the model of the ABC.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I really just by understanding it, I think by itself can really fix a lot of things. But I guess we can go there because I'm really fascinated and I want to learn more about it. So I guess you are the right person to to ask those questions.
Okay, great, perfect. All right, so rational emotive behavior therapy is REBT for short. It basically means that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% our reaction to it. So whenever a triggering moment hits, like let's say with social anxiety, I'm walking into a room and everybody's looking at me, right? That situation in and of itself doesn't make me anxious, but my beliefs about what's happening have the biggest weight in how I feel about it.
Okay.
So Dr. Albert Ellis created REBT, and so his hypothesis was that when we have a triggering event, if we think irrationally about the situation, we have an unhealthy negative emotion. And if we think rationally about the situation, we have a healthy negative emotion. Before I became a therapist, I used to think that everything that felt bad was automatically unhealthy.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't go through life without having some type of negative emotion. So to know if it's an unhealthy negative emotion would mean that we're not solving the problem if we can solve it. We're not coping with the problem. We're making the problem even worse than it already is by how we're reacting to it.
Yeah, just expanding, making it even worse just by thinking more and more, like a loop that makes everything worse.
So let's say if I was walking into a room and everybody's staring at me and I'm thinking, oh my God, they hate me, they don't like me, they think I'm stupid, right? And thought that that was actually the case, then I might be motivated to avoid the crowd, to not go to the party, to leave the room. So that's actually making the situation worse in the long run because I'm not coping with it. I'm not facing my fears. I'm not dealing with it appropriately if my goal is to actually go and have a good time. And then it hurts my social life, my social functioning. If I keep avoiding social events, then how am I expected to get better at them if I'm continually avoiding them? So that would be an example of when I would have an unhealthy negative emotion based on having unhelpful irrational thoughts. So with anxiety, well, should I go into anxiety or do you want me to go into like shame or embarrassment?
Yeah, well, actually, before we go there, the things you have been saying, it feels like almost everyone suffers from anxiety at some degree, right? I mean, we all don't want to be judged by others. We all don't want to, be embarrassed. So, when is it become anxiety, and when is it just normal human condition being? Yeah.
Great. So I'll break it down even smaller. Okay, so phenomenal question. It was, when do we know if it's anxiety and when do we know if it's concern? In REBT, we call concern the healthy anxiety, and anxiety is unhealthy. Okay, so it's based on irrational beliefs. So there are 4 groups of irrational beliefs that fuel any type of unhealthy negative emotion. One is what we call awfulizing or terribilizing. We make up words in psych all the time. So that would mean if I take the situation and overestimate how bad it is. So if I think that I walk into a room and everybody hates me, that's awful, terrible, horrible, the worst thing in the world, the worst thing that could ever happen to me, right? Yeah. I'm taking that situation and kind of blowing it out of proportion. That's one group of irrational beliefs. The second one is what we call low frustration tolerance. What that means is talking yourself out of coping. It's too difficult, it's too tough, it's unbearable, it's intolerable, I can't stand it. Dr. Albert Ellis used to call it I can't stand it-itis, when people would continue to tell themselves that they can't handle or stand things because they're uncomfortable, which because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean that we can't endure it or can't get through them. The third group of irrational beliefs is labeling, or what we call the global evaluation of others or self. So that would mean, like, let's say I walk into a room and everyone's looking at me and I say, you know what, people here don't like me. That means I'm an idiot. That means I'm a failure. That means I'm no good. I'm worthless. uncared for. Okay, and then I give myself a holistic negative label.
Okay.
That's the third group. And so bear with me, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy. The fourth one is the hardest one to understand, but I'll try to do my best.
I like nerdy, it's okay.
Okay. Is what we call demandingness. So in a nutshell, what that means is we're not accepting reality. So words that we typically use when we're not accepting reality are should, have to, must, ought to, it better. And so what this means is that we're tricking ourselves into thinking that life has to infinitely be the way that we want it to, and we're not accepting or acknowledging that life doesn't go the way we want all the time. So an example of this would be like, everybody absolutely has to like me all the time. Everyone has to accept me. Nobody can ever think anything bad about me at all, which isn't true, because me not wanting someone to think something negative about me doesn't mean that the universe can't allow it to happen. So in that mindset, I'm not accepting reality.
Yeah, so putting a lot of emphasis in others' opinions and turning that into what I see about myself is what others think of me.
In the context of social anxiety, yes, but it could really be about anything. It could be not accepting myself, it could be not accepting other people, or with anxiety, not accepting that the future is forever uncertain. And so the foundation, if you want me to get extra nerdy on you, is that you can have all four groups of irrational beliefs, but Dr. Ellis proposed that although you could have all four groups of irrational beliefs when you're having an unhealthy negative emotion, you have to at least have demandingness. So the belief is that anyone that's emotionally disturbed or has an unhealthy negative emotion, the foundation is that they're not accepting reality. And then they can have the other three groups of irrational beliefs with it, but never without
demandingness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in social anxiety, to keep the topic, the demandingness would probably be everybody has to like me.
Yeah.
Instead of I want everyone to like me, but they actually don't have to.
Yeah.
Which would be the rational version
of it. Yeah. Is that related to the rigid beliefs or rigid attitudes and flexible attitudes? I was also reading a little bit more. So Absolutely. It's like people must like me, or I must be with this person. Otherwise, if she leaves me, I'm not cannot live without this person, or kind of trying to figure out a way to, okay, this is not the worst case scenario. I can still be someone if this person leaves me, for example.
And Dr. Ellis called it masturbation and shoulding on yourself as a way to remember that. He had a great sense of humor. The must, the should statements. And while we're focusing on words here, and one last nerdy tidbit before I nerd myself out to the extreme here, is there was a psychologist, I believe, named Dr. Zybski in the 1930s who did semantic psychology. So what he realized was that people that were emotionally disturbed, if they just explained the problem to themselves using different vocabulary, they immediately felt better. So Dr. Albert Ellis researched it further and realized that people can tell themselves like what's happening using different language, and they automatically feel better. So the words that we use to describe ourselves, our environment, the future, the past, whatever, they influence how we actually feel about that, because they have subconscious beliefs attached to the words, which we call schema or unconscious belief systems. So that's my job, to help dig them out. We challenge the belief and replace them with more flexible ones so that the same trigger doesn't get you to the same emotional place once the beliefs have been changed. But most people don't even know what they're thinking or believing at the time of the trigger. So it can feel like anxiety's coming out of the blue.
So they just feel the emotions and they don't even rationalize, why am I feeling this way?
because the beliefs are on the subconscious. Yeah.
And you kind of dig them out and actually look at them and see, put it into words, all these things, so that people, just by reframing it and thinking about it, they just can remove those emotions. And
right. And even Dr. Ellis had studied a lot on of Socrates and Greek philosophers, and we joke in cognitive therapy that Socrates is the first psychotherapist, because people used to come all over Greece just for him to dispute their own irrational thinking, and they felt better by just changing the way they thought about it. And that was thousands of years ago. So we call it Socratic questioning now, or inference chaining. But he's actually one of the founders of how we even created REBT in the first place, and the semantics theory.
That's really good, nice detail. Yeah.
Like he would be like, Socrates would come and someone would be disturbed and like, it cannot happen. He's like, well, why can't it happen? Because I don't want it to. And he's like, well, because you don't want it to, why is the universe not able to let it happen? And he would constantly use philosophy to challenge people's irrational beliefs, and they felt better. And they loved it for it.
Yeah, just by researching this stuff, I'm not saying that it changed me already, but it's just a nice way to, or a nice structure for me to think about my emotions, So something happens to me, so it's like adversity, basic attitudes, and consequences. So the ABC model is already pretty good, simple system to think about it.
And one thing to remember, because a lot of other therapists in the field give us a little slack about the ABCD model, like how could mental health possibly be so simple? It has a structure, but it is a very profound type of therapy. It's not like, just don't think that, all right, see you next week. It's that's identifying the thoughts and changing them and recognizing they're not helpful is only part of the battle.
Yeah.
The other part is getting the client to believe them.
Yeah.
And then to confront the situation head on, behaviorally exposing themselves to it so that they can not only feel better, but get better.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, and one last thing about REBT, we have different names for different emotions. So we have a list of the unhealthy negative emotions and the healthy negative emotions. So unhealthy negative emotions are guilt, depression, anger, shame/embarrassment, hurt, unhealthy jealousy, unhealthy envy, and anxiety. Oh, I forgot that one. And so the healthy alternatives would be concern instead of anxiety, frustration instead of anger, sadness instead of depression, disappointment instead of shame, regret instead of guilt. And then there is actually healthy jealousy and envy, believe it or not. But I used to think, how on earth could shame or embarrassment be something that I bring upon myself? I thought that when I was embarrassed, it just blew in from the winds of the east and it just overcame me, and I had no influence in how I felt at all.
Yeah.
And in the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, you can't be insulted without your permission first. And I realized that every time I was ashamed or embarrassed, I awfulized about the mistake, now that we know what that is, and put myself down for it, the negative label. If you don't put yourself down for your social mistakes and you don't awfulize about other people having negative opinions about you, you will never feel embarrassed. So
you do it to yourself, basically.
Right. And we might not be aware that we're doing it, but we're doing it. Because have you ever walked down the street and seen someone wearing something so crazy and you're like, oh my God, I would never
feel embarrassed
wear
for
that.
them.
And they're walking around like they're wearing jewels, like they're got their head high, and then because they're not putting themselves down for what they're wearing and regard other people's negative views of them less. They're not ashamed.
And I don't know if you are familiar with a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It really reminds me of that book. That no fucks given, just owning
It's
themselves.
Yeah, it's true. And I have a lot of clients that come in for social anxiety, and they're constantly saying, well, I like myself and I don't put myself down and I still have shame and embarrassment. So that's not true. And when we really dig deep enough, they eventually realize that they're doing
To themselves.
we don't want to admit it. I don't want to admit that I'm contributing to my own misery at times, but that's just part of being human, and growing. So what Dr. Ellis would do in REBT would say, all right, well, we'll challenge your irrational beliefs about other people thinking negative about you. And then let's expose yourself to more situations where people might think negative about you, and you actually expose yourself to the shame and overcome it.
Okay.
He went to Central Park once because he used to have a shame issue regarding rejection and other people, other women not liking him. So he went to Central Park and asked out as many women as it took until 50 women rejected him to expose himself to the social shame.
Yeah, shit.
So he would do that all the time, or he would have clients walk down the streets of New York with a banana on the leash, and people would look at them like they were crazy, and they would be practicing not putting themselves down or awfulizing about it, and they'd be exposing themselves to the negative views, but they wouldn't be feeling ashamed because they'd be changing their thoughts, and they would get over the social anxiety really fast.
And it would be permanent.
Yeah. We call it shame attacking exercises, where like people would get in an elevator, and instead of their backs to everyone, they would stand facing the other person, looking at them. Just do weird social experiments.
It's very aggressive.
Yeah, to put themselves in a shame-provoking situation and still not beat themselves up about it. And you'd be surprised how fast the social anxiety will go away.
Yeah. Do you recommend that to your clients, for example? Do you do that type of exercise?
Not session one, because then they'll think I'm...
Yeah.
We usually...
So take this banana and go outside.
Yeah, I mean, like imagine that session one, they're so anxious just coming into therapy. I'm telling them the homework's to put a banana on a leash, okay? They're not going to come back. So first is, instilling hope in the client. Then we introduce the ABCDE model with REBT. We start doing some disputations, we call it, where they're talking about their triggers. I'm helping them uncover their irrational beliefs. We're challenging them together, learning how they're not rational and replacing them with more healthy, flexible beliefs. And then when they get good at doing that, we start doing some imaginal exposure, where they'll imagine themselves, let's say with social anxiety, walking into a party and everyone thinks, oh my God, look at this person. And so they're kind of feeling that emotion come up just by imagining it, and then de-escalating themselves. And then when we're good at just de-escalating oneself and they have like a buy-in that REBT works because they're feeling better and they're along the model, then we kick it up a notch where they're actually exposing themselves to it, the triggers. Once we've laid down the foundation and they have a buy-in that this isn't crazy, but it's actually working.
Yeah. And how long more or less it takes for a person? I guess it depends the person, but for them to realize that how much they are in control of their own emotions, or that they are the ones holding the key, for example. Yeah.
Okay, so how long on average would it take?
Or is it something that you can average, or if it's very, very specific?
Usually takes about 20 years. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I would be comfortable with that. These things take time.
It takes time, but it can happen pretty quick depending on the participation of the client. Of course, you have to have a skilled therapist, so it's not all on the client. But it's not all on the therapist either, because sometimes we're only limited to how motivated the client is to follow through. So I like to give my clients therapy to go so that they're able to do exercises in between the sessions to get better quicker.
Yeah.
But I would say for the most motivated client, So best case scenario, like 12 to 16 weeks. Okay. So that would be what, like 3 to 6 months or so.
Okay.
Is pretty average for social anxiety.
And you said like it happens sometimes like this, so it can be like a very fast shift, at least to understand that.
Right. It can happen if they're implementing the therapy to go and they're exposing themselves to it. Because sometimes the clients just want to come in and talk, and every week we're kind of disputing a new trigger, but then they're not following through with the behavioral part of REBT, the B, right? And getting their hands dirty and actually confronting a situation that would normally trigger shame or embarrassment, like a social setting, and not going there with their thoughts. And that's when they really get better.
Yeah, when they accept that they need to take the leads.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm very curious, what type of clients do you have? I'm sure everyone at some degree suffers about anxiety. And something that I also wanted to check with you.
Sure.
A lot of, during the years, I guess you have more notion about this, like anxiety disorders have been on the rise, right? And what's your comment, or what do you think is the reason for this rise in this type of issues?
Okay, so great question. Should I start with the last question or the first one? I think there was a couple in, right?
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, so I guess what type of people do you usually, like more young people, like around like my age or our age, like 25 or more younger?
I'm a little older than you. No, but yes. So I would say probably millennials in a big way. I work with.
That's what I expect. Okay.
But I do have clients that are in their 50s even. So it depends. And as far as what they usually come to see me, I mean, I do life coaching too, which is when people come in and they just have one specific emotional or behavioral problem that they want to work exclusively on in a short amount of time. So they can have all different types of emotional or behavioral problems. But a lot of it, social anxiety is a big one. And generalized anxiety, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but the worry warts, we call them.
Sorry?
You ever heard the expression worry wart? Someone that worries. All right, it's like an American term.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know that it is.
Certified worriers, I call them. People that worry about everything and anything, you know. Yeah. Or people with panic disorder sometimes too, that anxiety about their own anxiety. Or panic attacks. I don't specialize working with PTSD. That's a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, so usually around like, I think, how old's my youngest client now? I did have one in her early 20s. I think we just finished. But usually around like late 20s, 30s. Couple in their 50s.
Okay. And is usually, because I know a lot of people that are, you know, making the transition, for example, from college to starting working. And I think college, they have a lot of expectations from when they finish working to start a job. And I think that transition really is very tough for a lot of people, because they spend this whole time studying something and then they get to a job and they are told that, I mean, they cannot perform as they expected, so there's a lot of performance issues. So I would like to, what's your experience with this type of cases?
So is it anxiety about not doing everything right? Or not performing adequately?
I think it probably would be also stemming from like purpose issue, like they are going to a job that's not necessarily going to college just by going to college and not really. I think there's a lot of complex things going on surrounding this topic.
So would it be, so since anxiety is future-based, what are they fearing is going to happen? Are they fearing that they're going to fail at the job? or that they're not going to get a good job, or they're anxious that they don't even know what's next or where to go or what's on the horizon.
I think it's more like not being able to perform as they expect they should be performing. You know what I mean? Spending like 6 years studying and then getting to a job and they are like told that they're not doing the job correctly, and like a lot of expectations from just studying during a lot of time and then just realizing that you don't know as much as you think you know.
So if it's in the present, then it wouldn't be anxiety. So those could be examples of anger or depression, possibly.
Okay.
Things aren't going my way. I'm a failure. I'm no good. I'm not performing adequately. If it were an example of anxiety, it would be on the horizon. So it would be what if scenario. What if I don't perform? What if they don't like me? What if I'm not adequate? That would be like an example of the anxiety then.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, like it's not actual anxiety, it's more like a fear of they want to perform, and I don't know, it's not related to the future, it's more how can I perform better now. I guess that's the takeaway.
Yeah, because anxiety would always be future. So if it's in the here and the now, I'm not performing well, I'm not doing well. It could be self-anger, it could be anger at the world, the universe, could be depression. An anxiety example would be, what if this happens in the future? And it's hard because I didn't know that before I was a therapist that anxiety is always future-based, because you feel anxiety in the present, but the thoughts are always in the future.
Yeah.
And then whenever something that you're fearing is going to happens, then in the present, then anxiety jumps to, well, what could happen next? So it's never now.
Yeah, so that probably it's more of a, probably the cases I talk to people, I need to dig deeper and kind of understand if they feel, not ask what's going on now, but if they fear, what do they fear about the future?
Right. And it could still be anxiety. They could just say like, oh my God, like I'm expecting that I'm going to be performing well and I'm not. So this could happen to me.
Okay.
And then jump to anxiety again.
Yeah.
And the pressure to perform can be anxiety provoking because there's the pressure in the present to avoid what could happen if they don't perform.
Yeah.
So then it would still be anxiety.
Yeah. And at what point, at what degree do you think that having anxiety is a good thing? Being like feeling that pressure, that drive to, I guess like you moved to New York City and then you want to start your own thing and you want to succeed. And of course you will worry about the future. And
what if I don't succeed? What if I fail? What if
Isn't that also driving you and pushing you to do better, get better clients, just do better at your job?
So anybody that asks me if they're in concern, which is healthy anxiety as opposed to anxiety, which is unhealthy, is my question to you would be, or to your friends, whoever hypothetically we're talking about.
Can be for me.
Say, I have a friend that struggles with,
No, the before was a friend. I like to be very direct on this. We can talk about me, yeah.
Right, and like we said, shame is a choice, so there's no need for you to put yourself down for having a very common problem that sometimes, even I'll wonder, So about myself. So the question was, can you remind me the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it would be like at one point anxiety on, in your case, concern, it would be like it's a good thing to have actually.
Okay, perfect. So what I ask all my clients if they want to know if they're in concern or anxiety is what you're feeling working for you? Okay. Is it helping you reach your goals? If it's a no, it's anxiety. If it's a yes, it's concern.
Mm.
So let me explain that a little bit further. Because I used to think that whenever I had butterflies in my stomach, it was always bad, right? So concern, I could have some butterflies, some jitters. It's a healthy anxiety and thinking rationally. But I'm not scared of the future. I'm just anticipatory that things could go wrong and that I could actually handle them. So I'm going to still confront what I'm anxious about or concerned about, right? So if I'm concerned about people thinking negative things about me, I'm still going to go to the party. I'm still going to walk into the room. I'm still going to talk to other people.
Yeah.
I might feel a little bit nervous because my personality might be introverted and I might just generally care that other people like me and that I don't make a social mistake, but I'm still going to talk to people.
Yeah.
If my goal is to go to the party and I'm not going and I'm avoiding, or I get myself into the door, but I'm looking around, I'm not making eye contact, I'm walking around looking at the ground like I dropped something, right? Then that would be a sign of anxiety. If my heart feels like it's coming out of its chest, if I can't talk, I'm shaking.
Yeah.
I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping that well the night before the party. My stomach feels like it's in knots. Not working.
That was me. Yeah.
So that's anxiety then, not concern.
Yeah.
Concern, you're still going to sleep at night. You're still going to eat regularly. You're not going to overeat or undereat. You're still going to socialize with other people. You're going to confront what you're concerned about. But you're not going to feel good because when you're thinking of the realistic harm that could happen to you, but you're still going to go about your day.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah. Perfect. You mentioned for you that. Of course, you also have those concerns about yourself, and I'm just wondering how
Totally.
Being like a psychoanalyst and having all this theory behind you, how
Or
all
psychotherapists.
Psychotherapist, sorry.
Psychoanalysts are Freudian, but
okay.
No disrespect to the Freudian therapists out there. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
So psychotherapists.
Yeah.
How do these skills actually translate into your more dealing with your own emotions? And I'm just curious about that. How do you handle that and implement these systems? Because I don't know if you also have a psychotherapist, sorry.
I don't have a therapist. So I'm going to answer it, I hope not in a long way, but...
we have time.
Okay, so great question. So how would I deal with my own stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the premise of REBT isn't going to be a lifelong working relationship. There is an end goal in mind. Although I love my clients to death, I don't want to see them in 15, 20 years in the future. I'm hoping that they get better and they live their life fruitfully and productively and as happy as they possibly can, because life is really too short. So I'm in the business of putting myself out of business by helping people become their own therapists. And one thing I want to add that I don't think I've added yet about REBT, and then I'm going to apply that to my own life in a minute, is that many other therapies focus on the probability of bad things happening. Like, let's say I'm walking into a room and what's the likelihood that people don't like you, and what's the probability they don't like you, and how do you know this to be true rather than feeling it to be true? We call that emotional reasoning, which can be great. Or if I'm getting on an airplane and I'm looking at statistics, well, there's a really high probability that the plane's not going to crash. Yeah. That can help people get on, but I don't think it goes far enough. So what REBT does is it meets the client at their absolute worst case scenario and builds them up from there. So if the worst case happens, they've got coping skills, and if it doesn't happen, then great. So what I like to ask my clients and myself when I have a trigger, what am I fearing is going to happen, right? Because let's say if I'm a client that has a phobia of airplanes, Actually, I used to have a needle phobia, but I'll get into that in a minute. And I have a fear of being rejected at the party, right? And I'm like, yeah, there's a low probability the plane won't crash. Yeah, there's a low probability that everybody won't like me. But what if what they're thinking is true? What if everybody does hate them at the party? Then what? Right? So meeting people at their worst and pretending their initial inference about what's happening is true can actually help you get to their deepest unconscious belief system and build them up from there. This is going to sound really insane, but it works. Okay? So I used to have a fear of plane crashes. I actually had an uncle that died in a plane crash. So it's kind of like a family phobia. Yeah. So I was thinking, okay, I'm about to go on a plane. I really want to go on this tropical vacation, but I can't get there without getting through the plane, right?
Guess you can swim.
So, but then there's sharks, right?
You don't have fear of sharks, so.
Yeah, right. Maybe I'm like, Wilson, Castaway or something. But all right. So I say, well, what's the probability of the plane crashing? But if we're really anxious, we're going to be like, well, what if it does? And to help me, and it might sound crazy, and how I help clients with phobias is making peace with death. And because my worst case scenario would be the plane crashing, and how I make peace with that. So if it crashes, it's out of my control. There's nothing I can do. I can accept that although I want to live a very long, healthy life, that's not guaranteed. And that worrying and avoiding planes doesn't guarantee my safety. I could avoid every plane out there and walk down the city of New York and a brick falls off the scaffolding and lands on my head. So it's really about not, with plane phobia, is lack of control. Okay. And not wanting to surrender that most things in life are actually uncertain and that there is no guarantee in life. So I tell myself, if I'm going to get on this plane, there's a low probability of it crashing. If it does crash, I can handle the crash. It's going to happen really quick. My own death wouldn't be awful or terrible. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It would just be really bad. And me not wanting it to happen doesn't mean it can't happen. And I kind of have like a serenity type mindset that if this is my time, then I'm okay with that because there's nothing I can really do to prevent it. And as a whole, when it's my time, and it gets me on the plane. And then I say, well, I always get a window seat, and I say, well, at least on the way down, I'll get a great view. So, and it's going to happen so fast, I'm not even going to feel it, and then boom, I'm gone. So what is there to really be scared about?
Yeah, it's a nice way to go.
And it sounds insane, but
it helps.
I feel like helping clients get on the plane is more about their own demandingness and false sense of control about their own mortality more than it has to do with the plane crash. And helping people to accept that death is inevitable, it's unknown when it's coming for us, and that our own death isn't the worst thing in the world, it's just really, really bad. Things don't seem so scary.
Yeah.
And you bring more life to your life,
Yeah. And so that's why you're saying that you are in the business of putting yourself out of business because you want them to think like that for their own, right?
Right.
Yeah. Like just get into that thought pattern of, okay, let's like figure this out and like actually look at it at an objective way and just if it happens, it happens.
In your worst case, and of course, me telling myself that, I know there's probably viewers out there saying, yeah, I can tell myself that, doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. It takes a long time practicing the rational beliefs until you get to the point of actually adopting it, because maybe you spent your entire life rehearsing the irrational ones, right? So, for example, I had a phobia of needles where I used to actually pass out. And the nurses thought that I was insane. Like, why is he passing out? And if you really think about it rationally, it's just a needle taking my blood out. Like,
it's
really?
Just very irrational.
In a medical setting, so if anything were to happen to me, there's a very small probability that, something catastrophic is going to happen. But phobias are never rational. So I remember having a conversation with myself saying, I'm going to go in there and be uncomfortable. I'm going to get my anxiety is going to get high. I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm not going to feel good. But all of that is something that I can handle, right? The frustration, low frustration tolerance beliefs I was used to hold on to. I can handle this. I can tolerate this. I can get through it. And if you think about my entire lifespan from the time I was born until the present, getting my blood drawn wouldn't even be a fingernail slither on my entire life timeline. So for my anxiety to spike up for just a couple minutes of my entire life, with the promise that if I do it enough times, I can get over this freaking phobia, right, was worth it to me. So I said, if I pass out, I pass out. If I get antsy, I get antsy. I just let myself do that and talked myself into coping with it. And within, a few times of exposing myself to blood drawn to the doctor, I got over it. I don't ever enjoy it.
Yeah.
But
I don't think anyone does, actually.
And say, all right, knock yourself out. But I had to expose myself to it. I couldn't just challenge the irrational beliefs. I had to actually do the work myself. And I said, how could I be talking all my clients out of their worst fears, and then I can't even get blood drawn? I got to do it myself. So I'm going to climb up into that chair and say, here we go, Yeah,
take 2 pints, please. There's a lot of connections between Stoicism, actually, and REBT. It's quite interesting to just push yourself to just go through the pain and just accept it. I really enjoy it.
And that's also part of the demandingness, right? I must always, or I should always absolutely be comfortable all the time. And many times when we have anxiety about our own anxiety, or anxiety about depression or anxiety about anger, we can have an emotion about an emotion. It's usually under the premise that we think that we have to be comfortable all the time. Why do I have to be comfortable all the time?
Yeah.
And
there's something that we see a lot on social media, right? That you always see the others, everyone just having amazing lives, and you fall into that trap of thinking that life should be this way. And I wanted also to, how much do you think social media kind of contributed to these spikes in anxiety amongst millennials, for example?
I think, so if we want to keep it the anxiety theme, I think social media would be more of anxiety about not living up to our fullest potential.
Or just your idea in social media as a
I think it fuels depression and low self-esteem for sure. And low self-esteem is so I think, so social media, if it's about anxiety, then it's always future-based. So like, what if I'm not able to live that life? What if I'm no good? What if I'm not able to fulfill my biggest potential, right? But if it's in the present, it could be anger with ourselves. It could be jealousy. Depression, jealousy, unhealthy jealousy and envy. And so, I mean, I think it's a bigger trigger, I think, for depression. Or conditional self-acceptance, which means that, like, depending on how many likes I get or comments, then that must mean that I'm better. And if I don't get that many likes or comments or followers, like, that must mean that I'm less than. And so then it becomes the global eval, right? Group of irrational beliefs where it's labeling. So we're using social media as a tool for our self-worth. If I have X amount of followers, I'm better. If I don't, I'm not as good. And comparing ourselves to other people, well, they have this many followers and this many likes, or they look better in their gym selfie, shirtless than I do, or whatever. So that must mean I'm not as good as that person. And then when we're putting ourselves down by using these rating scales, then we feel depressed. So I think social media is more of conditional self-acceptance. Unconditional self-acceptance would mean that we like and love ourselves whether we're performing well or we're performing worse, that we don't rate ourselves at all about anything, because a couple likes on a picture can't holistically make us all one thing or the other. It's only part of what makes us who we are. A part never equals a whole.
Yeah. So do you recommend usually for your clients to use less of social media? Or is that never part of a conversation?
I think social media is less of the problem, and the biggest problem is rating ourselves. Because if you don't rate yourself, it doesn't matter if you're on social media all day, although I don't recommend that, or being off of it all day. Because if we're just avoiding social media, but we're not dealing with the constant need to rate ourselves, then we could do that with something else.
It doesn't need to be social media. It will just reflect itself on social media.
I mean, social media makes it easier because it's more in your face, but it can still trigger a deep-seated belief about ourselves that we have within, that we're not adequate if we're not measuring up.
Yeah.
And so I think social media has a role, but the biggest influencer in how we feel is what we're telling ourselves, and the rating scale is a big one. Hope that answer your question.
Yeah. So far, you are answering all the questions.
If you don't rate yourself and put yourself down for it, you don't feel bad. But what people also need to realize is that if you rate yourself in a good way, that's not rational either, because we're not entirely good or entirely bad. If getting not enough likes on a photo makes me entirely worthless, then getting a lot of likes on a photo wouldn't make me entirely worthwhile. That a part never equals a whole. So if I have this big social media following and I look great shirtless and everybody raves about it and says, oh, you got to follow this guy because he looks so great without a shirt or whatever, that still doesn't rationally make me better than someone that doesn't. So we also want to be careful of not giving ourselves positive labels either. That why not just stop rating ourselves altogether, that I am Nathaniel and you're Diogo, and that whether we're doing well or worse at something never makes us all one thing or another.
Yeah.
That we're just human beings that have capability of doing things well and capability of doing things poorly, and we are neither entirely good or bad. We're just human.
Yeah. Just accepting imperfections and just trying to every day just try to fix those things that are not healthy, or the unhealthy emotions.
And then you got the Facetune and the filters and
so I guess
rig the photos to begin with. Not saying everybody does that, so you don't even really know what's really case anyway.
It's just a highlight reel of the highlight reels.
Right. And it gives you a dopamine rush, and you're like, wow, people really like what I'm saying, and we feel really good because we're subconsciously giving ourselves a positive rating. And there's nothing wrong with feeling good about having accomplished something. We just want to make sure that doesn't make us better than someone that's not.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't put our self-worth in that. Yeah. I actually was getting way too much into Instagram and just following a little bit too much for my personal taste, all the likes and all the pop-ups that come, that red symbol that comes when someone likes it. So I just because I still need to use Instagram for Raw Delta and publish the things. So
Me too. So I hear you, brother.
yeah, exactly. So it kind of is a tool in some way for us, but I disabled all the notifications and I put it in the corner on my phone, just hidden, saying like a folder saying "Do not touch," and it actually worked. Because my brain was in that setting of just automatically just swiping and touching that icon and just scrolling automatically. Then like 10 minutes later, I just realized that, man, I spent all this time not doing anything. So just by removing all notifications and just hitting it, I don't do it anymore. It's just like the trigger that developed the habit. And every time I catch myself going there again, I change it again, the location. And it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's pretty smart. I mean, yeah, the times have changed, and we need social media to kind of keep the business alive and to have a social media presence. But then we also find ourselves falling into, the pressures to be amazing at everything that we put out there, and can be a really big sense of rejection. But remember, rejection influences how we feel, but our beliefs are what make us feel the worst about it. So if you have 100 people with an Instagram account, let's say, and everyone is thinking that they're rejected by putting up a bad picture that no one really cared about, and the algorithm didn't see how many people liked and shared it or whatever to make you more visible, that would never have to do with your, I'm sorry, I just lost my point.
Yeah, I feel like just the likes doesn't equal being more than others, or views. I mean, one thing I learned from doing YouTube for a very long time is that sometimes YouTube just likes your stuff and the video gets more views just because it reaches more people, because YouTube just shows it to more people. But if you keep consistent and just create the best content you can, eventually people will find it, regardless of the views that you get from that video or not. Because you're, again, circling back, you're not in control. Once you release the video, you cannot do anything. You can promote it and all that, but ultimately it's luck. Yeah.
And that we're not defined by that either. We're not defined by how many likes we get. We're not defined by, people thinking it's great or bad. And we're not even defined by our careers. They're just a portion of who we are. They don't define us either, whether we think that we're performing well or bad. So so what I was saying earlier, I'm sorry, I had forgotten my point, but if there was 100 people that all were having a sense of rejection for putting a bad post, not all those 100 people would react the same. One might be angry and thinking, people absolutely should like everything that I have, and this is BS, and I won't stand for it, and life's not fair, and it should be. And someone could be anxious about their rejection, like, oh my God, if people don't like this, what if I put something else out there and they don't like that? What if no one ever likes me? What if I never get as many followers as I want? Or someone could depress himself about the rejection and say, figures nobody likes me, I'm a complete failure, everything I do is bad, it figures that no one would really care about what I have to put out there. So that same rejection could trigger any type of emotion depending on what you're thinking about. So the rejection has less to do with how you feel than what you tell yourself.
It always circles back to you decide how ultimately you are responsible for your emotions, let's say.
And at first my clients have struggles with this because they're like, well, what do you mean I'm making myself anxious or depressed or angry or jealous or hurt? Why the hell would I do that? But they are and they're not. It's not their fault, because if you don't have insight about how to change your thinking and behaving, then of course it's out of your control. But now that they're learning how to control how they feel by catching their thinking and how changing their thinking influences how they feel and behave, now the door is open where this is not your fault for feeling that way, but just something to take accountability with and to start implementing the tools to get control of how you feel. Yeah. So yes, it's not in your control if you have no idea or no insight about what to do about it. Yes, it can be in your control once you learn. Yeah. Like if I don't know how to do, complex calculus, then it's not my fault or in my control. But if I know how to do it, then I can just do it. Yeah.
So imagine that like someone is listening to this and they kind of struggle with the things we've been talking about, and what you say is like a good habit or a good thought pattern that they can implement. Of course, I'm sure you would recommend if they can seek someone like you to help them, but something that they can do on their own just to start and kickstart this process.
For anxiety?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of little clue about anxiety. If you believe that things in the future can always be bad, but can get worse, and because they can always get worse, that would never rationally mean that they're awful, terrible, and horrible, and that you can handle absolutely anything but death, because death is the only thing that we can't physically endure, you're not anxious. So if you don't awfulize and don't talk yourself out of coping with problems, you will never be anxious. You'll be concerned. People that think they can handle anything but death, and people that believe that bad things can happen to them, but never things that are 100% bad, they don't feel anxious. So
you're saying it's not a negative emotion, an unhealthy, sorry.
Well, yeah, it would be concern if they're thinking that way.
Yeah.
So,
and that would be a good thing.
And what I'm picking on about the awfulizing and the low frustration tolerance, let me just say this part with the low frustration tolerance and why we can handle anything but death. So rationally speaking, if we, like let's say I'm going swimming and a shark bites my leg off, right? And I swim to shore and survive it, then I coped with it. So no matter how bad life gets, if you still have air in your lungs, you're coping. Maybe we're not coping as well as we'd like to, but we're still getting through it one way or another. So the only thing that we can't cope with is our own death, because we're no longer here, so we're not coping. So with anxiety, we're spending an awful lot of energy talking ourselves out of coping what's on the horizon. So if I get rejected, or if I fail the math test, or whatever happens to me, I wouldn't be able to handle it. It would be too much for me. It'd be too difficult to, I would just lose control of myself. It would be really bad. Those are people making themselves more anxious because they're talking themselves out of coping with the future problem. Imagine how they would feel if they spent their energy saying, I can handle anything. It would be difficult, maybe even very difficult for me to handle, but that doesn't mean that I can't endure it or get through it. Not anxious. And the second part is taking the imagined problem in the future and blowing it up into something that would be bigger than it really is. So the belief in REBT is that nothing can be awful, terrible, or horrible, because those beliefs mean that things can be 100% bad. And Dr. Albert Ellis, who created REBT, believes that nothing can be 100% bad because everything can always get worse. So if I say, oh my God, well, what about a traveling black hole that comes into the solar system and starts separating atom from atom? Life can't even escape sound. I don't think everything, time bends. Don't you think that would be a 100? Dr. Albert Ellis would say, well, it's still not as bad as two black holes, right? So life can always get worse. And if life can always get worse, then it can't be 100% bad. And if things can't be 100% bad, then why use words like terrible, awful, and horrible, which mean just that?
So speech has a lot of power over...
Right, absolutely. So if I tell myself, if I go to the party, people reject me, the rejection would be unfortunate, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And I could handle the rejection because I've handled rejection before, and I've handled people thinking negative things about me, and it hasn't killed me yet. Not anxious. Concerned. I promise you, if you don't awfulize and you don't use frustration, intolerance beliefs, you do not feel anxious. Every time.
Every time it works. Yeah.
But not just telling yourself that, believing it. That's the other part of it.
I will guess that will be the most challenging part.
But if you tell yourself it enough and confront it enough, you do believe it.
Yeah, and go through it enough times.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's your position on meditation as a form of, treating and kickstarting that? I'm just curious how do you see this new wave of mindfulness and How do you see that fitting in this therapy or in this help to people?
Well, I think mindfulness is great because, like we said, anxiety is never in the present, and mindfulness is always about the present moment.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. But keep in mind that mindfulness makes you feel better, and REBT makes you get better. So we can't always be in the present moment. Sometimes you got to think about what's ahead. And if we're awfulizing, using demandingness, low frustration tolerance, and labels or global evals every time we think about the future, then we're right back at square one. So exercise, mindfulness, yoga, deep breathing, healthy eating make you feel better. REBT gets you better. Because you're still going to tackle the beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, because the beliefs are always with you, no matter if you are like super healthy and super fit, right?
I mean, well, health absolutely affects your brain chemistry. So eating healthy and having more energy makes you want to do more things. So when you're getting out, you're doing more things, you're feeling better, you're looking better, then that can help you change your thinking patterns more easily. But you can still have anxiety instead of concern if you're not addressing the problem. Also, caffeine and nicotine are stimulants, so those affect your fight or flight response, and you can raise your physiological anxiety. So it may not even be having to do with your thinking. It's just your caffeine or nicotine intoxicated.
Yeah.
So, but I'm a big proponent of healthy eating, mind you.
Yeah. I think.
So I could talk about that. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself, because there's a lot of research about how that helps in a tremendous way. But you still got to change the beliefs.
Yeah, it sounds like a very good podcast episode for next time. Because I'm also a lot into healthy eating, of course, and how that affects the body-mind connection, basically, is a very interesting point.
And mind you, REBT not only developed from Socrates, it also developed from Eastern philosophy, and meditation, and how, these like Buddhist monks could like withstand being barefoot, meditating on like a snowy mountain, and still like. So then we're like, well, how the heck can that happen? Now we withstand that, and by changing your low frustration tolerance beliefs can impact how much you can endure something by even just changing your thinking. So they even did a study of people putting their hand in ice water.
Yeah. And
I think it was Dr. Ellis that did this, don't quote me on that, but he would say, I can't stand it, it's too cold. It's like, stand it for another second, stand it for another second, stand it for another 10 seconds. And they would keep telling themselves they could stand it, and they were always able to go a couple extra seconds past their capabilities of what they thought they could withstand. Yeah. And that just goes to show how powerful your beliefs are, and talking yourself out of coping, tricking yourself into thinking that you can't stand things, that your ability to tolerate things are finite, and then spending your whole life avoiding.
Yeah. I guess that's a little bit what therapy is, right? Just showing you how powerful you can actually be and being in control. And that's also physically, like I used to play basketball, and also having a coach that can tell you like, go, you can go more, just keep pushing. And then you just see, whoa, I can actually do this.
And it's also, I would argue that a lot of, people in deep meditative state are kind of embracing the pain. They're leaning into the pain. They're accepting it, which would be that anti-demandingness type belief. Like, because I want things to happen doesn't mean they don't have to happen. Things can happen outside of my control. I can accept these things happening. Things can always get worse. They're never awful. Bad things that happen to me or bad things that I do don't define me. Those are all very therapeutic mind exercises.
I'm really fascinated and interested with this connection that I found, because I just got to know this therapy, so REBT, through you, and I also see a lot of connection with Buddhism and Eastern philosophy.
A
And
lot.
yeah, it's quite interesting. Really.
I'm great. I'm glad that you found it interesting, and I think you know, it's not something that works for some people. It can work for pretty much anybody. And REBT isn't just about changing your thoughts and that's it, changing your thoughts and your behaviors, but also tacking on things that generally enrich your life. Like with my clients, let's talk about healthy eating some of the time. Let's talk about exercise. Let's talk about being with positive people and adding all of these things on to life to make the thought changing and behavior changing exercises just so much easier to do in life, just overall better. You know, I think I've been a big proponent of bike riding. I bike to work. It's a form of therapy, and the exercise, especially, I mean, it's snowing in New York right now. I'm watching it come down as we're speaking. But when I'm outside and it's sunny and you feel the sun on your back and the fresh air in the park, aromatherapy. I still have my diffuser in the back. I don't know if you see it going in the back. But so all that stuff just makes life a lot easier. I've also been 100% plant-based vegan for a long time. So that has helped me phenomenally with my moods and energy level. So I'm a big proponent in that, but REBT is what keeps me better, because you can go for a run, you can exercise, but if we don't get rid of the stinking thinking, we're right back at square one.
Yeah. At the end of the show, I always ask like 2 questions. So first one is, what's the thing you are currently struggling with? So something that you in your life, doesn't need to be too personal, of course, but something that's
now you skeletons out.
So I mean, because I'm usually interested in the, you know, the good and the bad. So first, like, what are you currently struggling with professionally? Just something that you feel like you could do better, so that we can also show people that we all have our problems. And
I mean, you're not going to make me look perfect. I thought that's what I signed up for.
No, sorry.
I'm just teasing. I'm definitely not perfect, that's for sure. Well, there's a lot of things I'm struggling with. I think in life, there's always going to be something that we're trying to overcome. Well, if you've worked with me, I do appropriate self-disclosure here and there, putting myself in similar situations that my clients might be in, and just relating to them how I've used to struggle with things, or sometimes even struggle with things and have to accept myself. This isn't more, or maybe it can also do with anxiety too, but I have an issue with the public transportation system in New York City. And if you're a New Yorker out there listening, you probably can vouch for me on this one. So I struggle a lot with demandingness and expecting that everything has to run on time, and then reality kind of slaps me in the face and says, not today. And I have to kind of grapple with my own irrational beliefs when I'm on the platform and the train was supposed to come and it didn't come, and I'm waiting and it's stopping underground, and then it starts with the unhealthy anger, right? Like, everything has to go my way. It should run on time. I can't stand it when it runs late, and I have to not get myself upset about that. Yeah. And then, of course, then the anxiety can start being triggered about the future. What if I'm late? Then I have to start my day late, and then I'll back up all of my clients. Or what if they're disappointed with me for getting late, and it's not my fault? The trains, yeah. So then there's the anxiety. So I have this kind of motto that I do where I take a deep breath, and then I say, what are the reasons why reality has to give me what I want today? And I can't answer that, because the universe isn't off a Nathaniel Cilley operating system. The sun will rise and set without asking my permission first. If everything was okay, what happened today, and the universe doesn't ask me for permission to allow problems to happen, that things can go awry despite how I'm planning the day to go. And I think reminding myself that life doesn't owe me anything, And me wanting to get to my destination on time or have a smooth ride doesn't guarantee that it has to happen, is what helps me get control of that the most.
Yeah, over the anger.
Where anger is just
angry Nathaniel.
Well, it should just work. And frustrated Nathaniel in the healthy emotion state says, well, it doesn't have to work just because I want it to, and I can handle it when it doesn't, because how many times have I handled it living in the city?
Yeah. I was going to ask you the opposite. So, what the thing you feel like you are good at?
It's like an interview question.
So
what
I guess
strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, know your strengths, but I guess that was already very good. Like that, you already have that system in place that you understand and you catch the emotion and you quickly try to correct for it.
I got to do my work, on myself. And I don't think it's a great advertisement for REBT if I'm the one kicking the can on the platform and cursing out and wailing my hands up and looking like a mess. And then I'm like, I'm a therapist and I can help you with your anxiety and anger. And I'm having a meltdown. Especially if I know that this works, then when is there ever a good time to disturb myself about something, really? There's never a good time, so I might as well just do it every day, because why the hell not, right?
Yeah.
And so what was my strength?
Yeah, if you want to do another one, because I feel like if you're catching your emotions and correcting them, I think is already pretty good, I would say, compared to others that I know.
So did I already answer the strength question, or would you like me
to?
Yeah,
if you want to add and just elaborate on that point, on your strength.
Oh God, how do I say a strength without sounding cheesy or arrogant?
It's okay. You already shared the weakness.
Technology is also not my strength, as you know beforehand, so that's a big trigger for anger, problematic anger, if I don't check it. So strength, I think that so on the outside looking in, I don't know how I appear on the outside. It might seem like, well, if he knows REBT and has been a therapist for, for 6 years, in the field for 8 years, his life was supposed to be a fairy tale. Ever since I was a kid, I always had this big appetite for life, where my mom and dad always told me, you always went by the beat of your own drum. No matter what people told you, you always knew what made you happy, as long as other people didn't try to interfere with that. And I think that is one of my big skills, where I'm very resilient. I get first New York apartment was pretty crummy, and the first job was pretty crummy, but everyone at work or around me would always be like, you're always the happy person. You always just find a way to be happy, whatever the heck life throws at you. And REBT is a big proponent of that, but I just am thankful for kind of knowing what I have to do to make myself happy and resilient with a lot of really tough things I've been through in my life, and that I've always been able to get through it and find my joy and my happiness and hold on to it and fight for maintaining that, no matter what life throws at me, is something that I really cherish and I'm very thankful for.
Yeah.
And REBT and healthy eating and living is something that adds to it, but it's not, I think it just enriches a part of me that was always.
That you already had, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a very good skill to have in New York.
And I do things that are a little bit more eccentric, like, why are you riding your bike? It's too hot out, it's too cold out. Why are you eating all these plants and not eating junk food? Why are you... So things I do like with other people, but there's a lot of things that other people might find weird, but I know that that's uniquely what makes me happy, and so I hang on to it. I'm not... as motivated by fitting in with the crowds as just listening to my inner voice and knowing what makes me happy, and not being too scared to embrace that, even if it looks a little strange. And as we've learned earlier today, shame is a choice, so I don't have to shame myself by other people disapproving of me, and so that makes it even easier to do.
Yeah. It's very good lesson. Yeah. Nathaniel, how how could people work with you? Do they need to be in New York City, or where will be like a way for them to, if they enjoyed our conversation and they connected with you, how can they reach out?
They can go to my website, which is www.nathanielcilley.com. So that's NATHANIELCILLEY. Do you want me to put it below too, or
no? I was just indicating that.
Great.
Linking
so
is
that'll be there.
So yeah, it's down below.
And I'm also have a Facebook business page, Nathaniel Cilley LMHC. Or you can go to my Instagram page, Anxiety Therapy NYC, and just get a hold of me through any means. There's multiple ways to connect with me in any of those.
Okay, so I guess every link is in the description of this video and also in the blog post associated with this. So Nathaniel, I'll say it's enough for today. I guess we'll make another podcast episode with...
Absolutely, I'd love to. And thank you so much for having me, and let me know if there's anything else that you need me to do.
Yeah, perfect. So guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching the video, whatever you are consuming this. And I guess I see you on the next episode.
Bye. All right,
Bye.
see you. Bye.